So welcome back. In this video, I'm going to take a little side trip and we're going to talk about Windows 10. And I'm going to give you a few of my tips for Windows 10. You know, a lot of people love to bang on Windows 10 for various reasons. But there are some ways to make it a little bit nicer. And also I'm going to talk about what I consider to be some kind of hidden gems in Windows 10 that I rarely, if ever, hear people discussing, and they can be very useful, especially if you're more technically oriented and you like to look at how things are performing. So we're going to start out with something you may be aware of, but I consider it to be very useful, and it addresses one of the big concerns that people love to have about Windows 10, that it's got a lot of bloatware, which means like game stuff that pops in your face and trying to sell you some things. So there is a really nice set of scripts that you can download for free. Some wonderful people have made them freely available. And this is the website where you can access them, and it's called github.com. And if you've ever done any software development, you're probably familiar with GitHub. It's a very, very, very popular website. And it's where software developers can upload their code and other people can look at it and maybe modify it and download it and use it. So a very popular website, and the actual location for this Windows 10 debloater is github.com/sycnex, you can see up top, /Windows 10 debloater. And if you go into Google and you Google Windows 10 debloater, it'll probably be the first thing to come up. So anyway, this is the website. You can download it, and what you're going to want to download and run is this Windows 10 debloater GUI. It's a version that has a graphical user interface, and it's basically a window that pops up with some buttons in it, and you click each of the buttons to remove a certain type of bloatware, and it goes through and runs the script and removes all that stuff. And it's got some easy instructions on how to do it, how to run it and download. Of course, if you look at YouTube Windows 10 debloater, you'll see a bunch of YouTube videos on how to do it. So I'm not going to go through the details of how to do it. It's fairly straightforward. But again, I suggest you use the GUI version. Now, if you scroll down, it has a list of the bloatware that is removed. 3D Builder, Solitaire, Maps, Camera Alarms, Bing, Sketchbook, a whole bunch of like Xbox stuff that you're probably not going to want. So I strongly suggest you give that a shot. I think you can undo it after you've done it and you decide, no, I don't want this. You can undo it. But I think for most people, a lot of the stuff is just an annoyance, so you're going to want to get rid of it. Now, that being said, it doesn't make Windows 10 perfect. There's some other stuff that personally I like to do, and that is, go into Windows settings, privacy, and go down to all these things and turn off the privacy options so that you aren't bombarded by all this stuff. So that's some basic setup stuff that I tend to do with Windows, and you might want to consider it. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is in the newer versions of Windows, they've kind of moved over to this Windows settings. Okay, so if you go down here to the start menu, you go to this gear thing, you're going to get Windows settings. Now, previously, in years gone by, you used to have this control panel, and here's Windows settings on the right and control panel on the left. You can still get to control panel, and personally I prefer it over Windows settings because it seems to make a lot more sense how everything is laid out. And actually in Windows settings, there's some things you just can't get to as far as I can see. Some important stuff you can't get to. Like, if you have to format your drive and stuff, I haven't been able to find some of that stuff here. And instead you get like, how to link your Android and your iPhone and gaming stuff and Cortana. I need none of that stuff. So I tend to like control panel because of the way it's laid out and it's fairly straightforward. So what I do is I put control panel down here on my taskbar. You can always put it on the start menu, or you can put it, a link to it, a shortcut to it on your desktop. But to get to Control Panel, on this link here, you right-click, and you can pin it to the taskbar. I've already got it pinned, so it gives you the option to unpin. You can pin it to the Start menu, or you can open the file location and make a shortcut, a desktop shortcut or whatever. But again, I recommend that you take a look at using Control Panel. And one of the reasons is because it lays out some really useful stuff. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is something that I've never seen anybody mention, and I find it to be hugely beneficial in troubleshooting your computer. Like if something crashes or something's gone wrong, there is a really nice feature of Windows 10 under Control Panel. The very first thing, System and Security, review your computer's status. And if you click on that, and then you get a Security and Maintenance window, and you go to Maintenance, click on that drop down, View Reliability History. And if you click on that, you will get this extremely useful summary. It's a daily summary of what happened on your computer. And there's a few parts. There's 3 parts. On the top, there is like a graph, and it goes between 1 and 10. And it's kind of fairly meaningless summary of how stable your computer is on that particular day. 10 means it's very stable. 1 means it's unstable. So you're going along nice and stable, and suddenly something happens and it drops, and then it slowly recovers, and something bad happens and it drops, and so it just gives you a kind of visual depiction of stuff that's been going on. This next section, these lines here, show the different types of events that may have occurred. And the top line shows application failures. Then you've got Windows failures on the next line, miscellaneous failures, warnings, and then general information. Applications are like when an application crashes. And down at the bottom is like general information. And that can be very useful because let's, for example, go into today, December 26, 2019, and everything is good except I've got this information. And down here, it gives you the details for those events. And it says informational events, security intelligence update. So at 1:27 p.m., I got an update, and it was summary successful Windows update. Okay, so I got a Windows update to defend Windows Defender this afternoon. Cool, all right, and that's good. If I go back one day to December 25th, Christmas, I had a application failure. And if I go down here, Google Earth stopped working at 7:04 a.m. And that's something I did. I was working Google Earth at 7:04 a.m. and I crashed it. So no big deal, but it also shows I've got 2 more Windows Defender updates. And the day before, I've got some Windows Defender updates. Day before that, nothing happened. Day before that, Windows Defender, Windows Defender. Oh, and I've got some successful driver installations. All right. Here I've got some driver installations, successful Windows update. So you can see day by day, and here I've got a crash. I was working in Visual Studio on a C++ application and it crashed. No big deal. But the important thing is here, not only you can see stuff crashing, but you can see updates, driver installations and updates, whether they're successful. And if something crashes, you can go back here to the day that it happened and say, oh, I got a driver update. Maybe it's a GPU driver update that caused a crash, right? So I consider this to be very, very, very helpful. A nice, quick visual depiction of what happened with your computer each day that you can go back and maybe troubleshoot any problems you had. So again, Control Panel, System Security, Security and Maintenance, Reliability Monitor. Give it a shot. I find it to be very, very helpful. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is something that people tend to knock in Windows 10. You know, people love to knock Windows 10. But there is something that is very useful, and I think there's some aspects of it that people don't quite understand, have never investigated, and it really can provide you some really good information. Whether you'll need the information or not is another issue. But here is Task Manager, and you can see it shows your CPU. And by the way, to get to it, you just go down to the bottom here and right-click. So I'll go to Task Manager, and you'll see your CPU. I've got a 8-core, 16-thread Ryzen, so it shows me the activity on each of the threads, and then I've got the memory. I've got 3 disks, and it shows activity, Ethernet, and I've got 2 GPUs installed. I've got a NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1080 Ti and a 1070 Ti, and this provides some very, very good information about what the GPUs are doing. If you have a GPU, it provides some very good information. Plus, Task Manager provides some other information that people don't generally know about and don't use, unfortunately. So you bring up Task Manager, I click on GPU 0, it defaults to these 3 windows. One is 3D, one is video encode, decode, and copy. All right? These 4 graphs show what are called engines that are running on your GPU. And an engine is basically a set of hardware that is designed to do a certain type of function, like 3D calculations or video encode and decode or copying. So it kind of addresses the specific workloads on your GPU. And below that is dedicated GPU memory usage. And you can see I've got here 11 gigabytes. My GTX 1080 Ti has 11 gigabytes of VRAM. And then there's shared GPU memory usage, which includes part of your, I think 50% of your system RAM. I've got 64 gigs, and this shows 32. And it's using basically none of that. So, and down here it's got some data about utilization and the memory usage. But what I want to address now is these engine utilizations. Now, I've noticed that people in like 3D rendering hobbyist forums, those who like to consider themselves experts who really don't know about what this stuff means, look at this and they run their rendering machines like CUDA or whatever, and they're running their GPUs and they're saying, well, I start up Task Manager and I go to the GPU performance and it shows nothing. Why does it show nothing? And they say, well, wait a minute, there's nothing shown here. What's going on? How can that be? What they don't understand is that these are different engines and that there are many engines that you can select. What happens is Windows picks by default 4 that it thinks most users are going to be interested in. 3D because of gamers, video encode and decode because people are going to be doing a lot of video work, and presumably the GPU might be doing the video encode and decode, and then copying. So it kind of comes up with these defaults, and people look at this and say, oh, it doesn't show me. My GPU is running flat out, but it doesn't show me that in any of these, so therefore Task Manager is useless. Well, no. There is a secret drop-down button here where you can select any of these many engines that might be running. So for example, CUDA. Let's say your GPU is running CUDA code. Then you have to select CUDA. The Windows 10 doesn't read minds. You have to tell it what data you want to see in the graph. The bad thing is you can't save this for next time. As far as I know, you can't save the defaults. But you can use this drop-down and you can select 3D, you can select a compute engine, you can select a graphics engine, CUDA engine. So if you know your software is using CUDA, select CUDA and then you will see what the CUDA engine is doing, okay? So this can be very useful as long as you realize that that Windows 10 doesn't read your mind and you have to actually select the data And in some cases, you may not know exactly which engine it's using. Like you might think it's 3D, but it actually is compute or something like that. So you have to know, and sometimes you got to cycle through a few of these to see which one matches. But the other really, really useful thing that I don't think any other software does, there might be a few out there, but you can also look at the details of each process and what it's using. Now, before we go to those details, let me just mention to you about why I like Task Manager compared to some of the other performance monitoring software out there. Now, when people are doing GPUs, they 90% of the time say, oh, download GPU-Z, which is a really nice free software application that monitors your GPU and gives you information. People say, oh, use GPU-Z because Task Manager is junk and it's no good. Well, not necessarily. And what I would do is refer you to a Microsoft blog. This is a couple years old now, 2.5 years old. But it is a Microsoft DirectX developer blog, and it talks about when they originally implemented GPU monitoring in the Task Manager. And it is by Steve Pronovost, lead engineer responsible for the GPU schedule and memory manager, presumably at Microsoft. And he has a wonderful, wonderful blog here. Go to devblogs.microsoft.com, DirectX, GPUs in the Task Manager, or you can just Google GPUs, Task Manager, Microsoft Windows 10, and you'll probably get it. But he has a really good explanation, and it basically says an operating system like Windows, its prime job is to manage resources and software and to schedule the hardware for each process that is running. It's kind of the traffic cop that controls how each process, the software, accesses the GPU, and it schedules the software to access the GPU hardware. I mean, you've got a limited resource on the GPU, or anything else for that matter, CPU or RAM. So the Windows, what they call the Windows Display Driver Model, WDDM, has a graphics kernel, and the graphics kernel includes a scheduler, a GPU scheduler, and video memory manager called VidSchedule and VidMem, and they are the ones that are ultimately responsible for scheduling the various engines of the GPU to the processes wanting to use them and to arbitrate and prioritize among them. So basically, if you've got 5 processes working and they all want the GPU, VidMem and VidSchedule, whatever, are the ones, basically Windows 10 provides RAM, VRAM, and it provides scheduling, and it arbitrates and prioritizes access. So it is the ultimate source of knowledge about what is going on with the GPU, because it decides how to schedule the GPUs. So, you know, his point here is that if you want the right data, go to Windows 10, and presumably Task Manager has the correct data. And the data that you might get from another application like GPU-Z is kind of secondhand information, and, you know, can you trust it as well as you should be able to trust Task Manager? So I tend to be a little bit biased towards Task Manager, since, you know, the basic job of a operating system is to make sure that not any software hogs the memory and schedules it and decides how much memory is being used and that kind of thing. So the data in Task Manager you guys load directly from VidSchedule and VidMem. Performance data for the GPU is available no matter what API is being used, whether it's DirectX, OpenGL, OpenCL, Vulkan, or other proprietary APIs such as Mantle or CUDA. Since they are the actual agents making decisions about GPU resources, the data in Task Manager will be more accurate than many other utilities, which often do their best to make intelligent guesses since they do not have access to the actual data. Okay? So while people love to jump and go to GPU-Z to get their data, according to Microsoft, you may not be getting the actual correct data. So just keep that in mind. That doesn't mean, of course, that Task Manager is always correct. There's at least one output that I have question about in Task Manager, but I think in general you can get some good information. Now, we talked about the performance data in Task Manager, but the one thing that I think it really stands out is if you go to the Details tab. And here is for every running process, it's got details on the process ID, what's the status, how much CPU usage it's using, memory usage, and it also can be set to have individual process usage of each GPU engine. That's extremely important. You're basically looking at the individual process utilization, not what GPU gives you, which is like the entire GPU utilization. So you can have Google Earth actually uses, for example, a lot of GPU. So you can have Google Earth at the same time you're doing a rendering and think, oh my goodness, the renderer is using all this GPU. Well, no, maybe Google Earth is using some, but you don't know it. The only way you know it is if you go into this details of Task Manager and see exactly what's actually being used. Now, the problem is, again, it doesn't default to showing you GPU usage. So people think, oh, there's no GPU usage in these details, so it's, Task Manager is nonsense. Well, you have to go here, like to UAC virtualization or memory, right-click, select columns, okay? And you've got a million columns, types of data you can select to add to this report. And if you go all the way down to the bottom, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 columns you can select. GPU, GPU engine, dedicated GPU memory, shared GPU memory for each individual process. And that's what I've got here. So I can go to Desktop Windows Manager and show that it's using 34 megs of memory, and on the GPU it's using 4% of this GPU 0 with using the 3D engine, and it's using 303 megabytes of dedicated GPU memory. So this is really good because you can pinpoint the GPU usage by process, and you can see what's using the most by clicking here to sort, and the maximum that's being used is Desktop Windows Manager. And then I've got the recording for this video is OBS Studio, and it's using the video encode engine, which is expected. It's using 200 megabytes of GPU VRAM. So now you can really get some good information and see what really the culprits are and what's really using your resources. So again, before you dismiss Windows 10 as being useless and go get GPU-Z, I suggest you take a look and really consider some of the other available settings. So that's basically it for this video. I hope it's been helpful. Otherwise, take care and have a really good day. Thanks.